I've got a murdered policewoman, and now a forensic officer who's apparently disappeared. What the hell is going on here?
We're going to seal off all roads around Shafton Forest.
We are talking about the movie Soldier of War. This one is also known as AUX. It might sound like a strange name, AUX, but it's shortened for auxiliary. I can understand why they changed that name. And this comes to us in 2019 by Uncork'd Entertainment. This one is directed and co-written by John Adams. It's a British movie, a low-budget British movie, with quite an interesting premise, I have to say. So the movie starts, we have these two teenage kids, and they're out in the kind of the woods fanning around, and they uncover a kind of underground, kind of World War II bunker, as it seems. And however, this bunker seems to be home to some type of supernatural being, a soldier, auxiliary soldier, a British auxiliary soldier, who doesn't realise that World War II has actually ended. And so he comes out and is trying to fight anyone that kind of comes in his path, etc. And it's basically this kind of escalating levels of violence with the locals, the police, and eventually the army. And what will happen? You have to watch the movie to find out. So let's discuss Soldier of War. I really enjoyed the premise of this film because it's kind of a different style of. I mean, it's hard to call this one a horror because there's not really a lot of horror elements in it, but I guess because we're dealing with a zombie or a ghost, whatever you want to call it, it would kind of fall into that category. But I really enjoyed the kind of a slightly different sort of take on this kind of genre, if you ask me. Now, if you're from the UK, this comparison is going to be a little bit easier for you. This really reminds me of kind of British-made kind of law enforcement dramas. So if you're familiar with things like The Bodyguard or Luther, it kind of reminds me of that, but with a supernatural twist. So the logline for this one, I would probably say, is kind of like Luther meets the undead. It's the best way I can kind of describe it. But it has that kind of that style of storytelling, that kind of that investigation, and it also kind of reminds me of almost like the kind of the old style kind of Universal monsters movies, in a way where you have kind of a slow kind of build up, and then kind of as the movie kind of gets towards the climax, people are kind of understanding what's happening. The kind of the monster is kind of known to more of the kind of the populace, and ultimately the threat is kind of like embraced, so to speak. So that kind of style of storytelling, it made it a very intriguing film. Now, the kind of the only name here that I kind of was familiar with in regards to kind of star power was John Rhys-Davies, and he's basically playing a kind of a World War II veteran who may have an idea about what's kind of going on here. So for me, what worked about this film, I actually thought the story was really good. I really thought the story was pretty strong here, and the way it ends. Now there is a kind of there's like an epilogue, I guess, or a kind of a stinger. I'm not talking about that bit. I'm talking about how the actual kind of, how it's dealt with, I want to say, without kind of giving anything away, was so kind of unique. It was so unique, but kind of nice, I have to say. I thought the ending of this movie ended in a way which is very different to a lot of kind of like horror films. But I've got to say, it kind of was pretty good. It was a kind of, I actually really enjoyed the ending here. I have to say as well, I thought I was impressed with the scale of this movie. Despite the fact this is a kind of a low budget film, we see loads of kind of police and police cars and people in kind of uniform and the army and stuff like that. And they all kind of looked and kind of, had the proper kind of uniforms and cars and everything. So you kind of felt that this is kind of what I mean. It's reminding me of these kind of these UK kind of like police and kind of like emergency services kind of shows, because it just has that kind of feel to it, and it's like this investigation. It ultimately kind of follows two police detectives, one of which is just kind of like come off being kind of a beat cop and coming into a plainclothes detective, and the other one is a kind of like a new a new plainclothes detective, and it follows them really. It's their kind of your point of view characters, and it's their investigation about what's kind of going on, and the actual level of violence inflicted on people, I've got to say, is pretty brutal. So this kind of our antagonist, so to speak, he ain't messing around. He is putting some serious damage on kind of anyone who kind of crosses his path. And there's an interesting point in the film where he comes across a certain individual that kind of is not what he's expecting. And I know that was quite an interesting kind of twist to it as well. What doesn't work for me, there is some pretty bad CGI effects. Now the actual guy itself is practical makeup, but there's some CGI gore here, and there's one shot in particular that looks like it's come out of a 2002 video game. It's kind of bad. I mean, it's not. Don't get me wrong. This movie hasn't got kind of. It's not all every minute, but there's a few instances here where you know, it's just a little bit kind of silly. There's an instance where someone kind of gets their head chopped off and it looks like a fountain, the amount of kind of CGI blood that's kind of coming out. And there's another instance as well where we have intestines kind of coming out, and it's really kind of quite bad CGI. And the only other thing I would say is there's a little bit of kind of wonky acting here. Not so much from our main cast, but just some peripheral characters. The cast is quite large here. And there's a few kind of like, this will sound a bit, but there's a few child actors here, and this is a low budget, you know, British indie movie, and there is some kind of some kind of touch and go lines in regards to some of the acting here, particularly with some of the kind of the child actors and some of the kind of the more bit parts, if that makes sense. But the actual main cast, I think, actually do a pretty good job, and I actually think John Rhys-Davies is actually really kind of likeable with his kind of role. There is kind of one, not really a villain, an antagonist, I would say, who is a little bit OTT, in honesty, a little bit kind of cartoonish, as the only other thing I would say. But I really actually enjoyed this movie quite a lot. I thought it was an intriguing story. There's a very kind of, I mean, we see so many kind of zombie World War II films. This was a little different, but kind of similarities to that. And it almost kind of, it's like a police procedural, but with zombies, or a zombie. So yeah, I gotta say, I kind of enjoyed this one. And if you're a fan of British drama, British kind of like crime drama, this is kind of fits in with that mould. So I'm gonna give this one a 7 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.